Hi there everyone. So now that I've got the motors and the ESC in this video I'm going to be putting on the flight controller, and I'll be wiring that up with this harness here. I'll be explaining how to get the matching wires to go into the right pins because they are different. They're not the same, I guess, from the manufacturers that made the ESC and the flight controller. So every time we do this, we always got to make sure that each of the pins are matching to the right one. So the V voltage to the right one V there, and also the ground, and also the motor wires and everything. So just to make sure that everything is correct. So I'll get through that in this video. I'll also be putting on the battery lead, which I forgot to do in the last video, but I'll get through that. And so yeah, I'm NamFam, let's get into it. Alright, so I'm just going to get the battery lead on, and as mentioned, I'll take this battery lead from the previous one just to make it easier, because the one that came with the ESC is not soldered on, the battery lead, or the wires aren't soldered onto the XT60 connector. So just to save me a bit of time, I'm just going to take it off the old one. So let's move this out of the way and desolder this. Alright, now that I have the XT60 and the battery leads taken off the old one, I'm going to have to tin the pads on here on the ESC that I'm going to get it on, and in preparation to get the battery lead on. So let's get on to that. I'm going to put some flux on here just to make things a bit easier. The flux will help with flowing of the solder, so it's always good to have the flux pen on hand here. Kester 951 off eBay. Alright, so I'm just going to tin these pads up. Right, it's enough on the negative terminal. It's a bit hard to get in here, so I don't want to touch the wires. I might actually grab this just to get it out of the way. Alright, I'll just add a bit more onto that one. Okay, so I'll just visually inspect that, just to make sure I'm not adding too much and it's flowing underneath. So there is a bit of a blob on the bottom, but it's still within that little section of the solder joint. So I'm going to get this on. Obviously we're going to get the black to the negative terminal and also the red over to the positive. So I'm going to be situating the lead like this. So I'm just going to try and get them inside those grooves that you saw earlier, and they can hang out the back like this. Alright, so let's give that a go. I'll get the ground terminal on first. Might just re-tin this positive wire here. Get some fresh solder on there, it always helps. Just give it a bit of time to cool down. But there, so the power lead is in and we're good to go. So I'll get this out now. So the wires are just going to go around like this, just a bit over the arms and around the standoff there. Same thing with this over here, so just around like that. There you go. Alright, so now that we have that in the battery lead, one thing I'd like to do is test out that the wiring of the ESC is good to go before we proceed. So I like to test things out as we go, as components are put in, just so I can debug or fix things up when I've got that one component in that I've just added, so that I know that it is working. So this is the first one obviously that's gone into this build, and each time I put in another component like the flight controller or the video transmitter, I will then test it. So the way I'm going to test it is using a V-Fly short saver. I'm just going to grab that right now. Alright, so this is the V-Fly short saver. It doesn't protect you from everything, but it does help to try and isolate a few of the problems. So it has helped me in the past and I will be using it now. So just grabbing a battery and plugging it in just to get it started, and plugging this in will not give power to the ESCs just yet, or the ESC and the motors. It's in standby mode at the moment, so you'll see that with the yellow light, and I can press this button here and it will deliver the power from the battery, as you can see here, to the motors. So I hope that there's no smoke that comes out of the ESCs or the motors, which is why it's called a smoke stopper, but we'll give it a go now just to see that it boots up. So 3, 2, 1. There you go. So those are the ESC tones that you want to hear. We don't have the flight controller connected yet, so you wouldn't hear those last 2 tones, but you can hear that now. So there you go. Cool. All right, so turning that off, we have that going now. ESC is a little bit on, so I'm just gonna unplug. Alright, so now we have the ESC installed with the power leads, and we've tested the ESC as well and the motors that are connected correctly using the V-Fly short saver too. So everything seems to be going okay so far. So we'll proceed to the next step, which is installing the flight controller. So to install the flight controller, we will have to use a lead that goes from the ESC to the flight controller, and the one that came with the flight controller and the original ESC doesn't have the right pin outs for the ESC to go from the ESC to the flight controller. So I'm going to have to modify that. And to do that, I have put together this wiring diagram. On here, you'll see on the ESC at the top there, and the flight controller where it's denoted with the FC top. The ESC, you'll see that over here we have the orange wire, which is C, and that's for the current sense. Next to that is N, which is not connected. We have the motor signals coming into the ESC, which is number 4, 3, 2, and 1. And next to that we have B, which is VBAT, and that will supply the flight controller with the battery voltage. Next to that we do have the last one, which is black, and that's ground. So those are the wires that are coming out of the ESC, and also the motor signal wires that are coming into it as well to provide the motors with the signal to be powered. And on the flight controller side, you'll see that here we have, going from left to right, V, which is the VBAT voltage going in. Then we have motor wires 1, 2, 3, 4. So those are the motor signal wires coming out of the flight controller. Then we have a 5-volt input, and I'll get to that in a second. You'll see there's a 5-volt BEC there. Next to the 5-volt is the ground. So those are the wires that are from the flight controller, and we'll have to connect them together. So with the 5-volt BEC, I've had to include that because while I was testing out the flight controller before making this video, I noticed that it doesn't have a 5-volt regulator on board. So it expects a 5-volt input, and I believe the original ESC that came with the flight controller has a 5-volt regulator that supplies a 5-volt input to the flight controller. It does have the flight controller, that is, it does have a 10-volt regulator which supplies a 10 volts to the video transmitter, and that's all it supplies, a 10 volt to the video transmitter, but it doesn't have the 5-volt regulator. So that 5-volt that comes in from the BEC will power the flight controller, but also it supplies the 5 volts to every other 5-volt pad that's on the flight controller. So on the receiver, I think the GPS, the LED and the buzzer, all of those 5 volts come from that same source. So with that in mind, we will now have to wire this up. So we'll have to get this harness and connect it together with the right wires. So looking at the flight controller wiring diagram, I'll leave that on the screen. I'll turn the ESC around like this so that it's in the right orientation. I'll move these motor wires out of the way so we can see it a bit better. There you go. And so we will have to wire this up. So this wire harness here, we can use one side of it to plug into the flight controller because that's what will be connected in, and it's the right size. So just pushing it in, it can only go in one way, and we have all the wires that are needed to be connected on the pin out there. So on the other end, I will be taking them out one by one, and then for the ESC came with its own plug size. So this will be going into the ESC I believe it's this way. So we try and get that in, and then we wire that up one by one, just to make sure that everything is in the right order. So to get these pins out, what we'll do is you can lift up this plastic tab, and as you lift it up, it's a bit hard to do this, it's pretty small, but you can lift it up and then pull out the wire. So there you go. So I pulled out one. I'm going to do that for the rest, and you'll see me do that now, and then we'll connect it to the other one. Right, there you go. I've taken this connector off, and then we'll connect this one here on. So I forgot to mention on the ESC there is that current sense wire. So here's, I'll make this larger again. So you have the current sense wire, which is orange there, that comes from the ESC, and there is a pad on the flight controller which is CRT. So that pad there is the current pad input, which tells the flight controller how much current is being pulled from the ESC. So it lets the flight controller estimate how much current in total is being pulled by the ESC from the battery, and then it divides it by 4 and tells you how much current is being drawn on average by the 4 motors. So that just gives an idea of how much current is flowing through, just to monitor anything. If anything goes wrong with the flight controller, you can diagnose it. So going back to these wires, we will then have to connect these into the ESC. So using the plug and the diagram there, we'll have to wire them up correctly. So from the flight controller, this is not the right one. So from the flight controller, I might have to use another wire because I've already snipped this one off. Alright, so from the flight controller, I might replace this one on the end because I've already snipped it off trying something else. So I'm going to lift this one and take it off as well and put a red one in there. So that would be the VBAT wire coming into the flight controller. So I'll take that out, and I'll use one that I've had previously, and I'll just steal the red one. Right. Alright, so I've taken the red one. I'll get this one back into the flight controller in a second once I get the red wire in. So plugging this in the right direction, it has a little tiny tab on the top, and make sure that lines up to the top. So once I push that in, give it a light tug and it shouldn't come out, and it would have caught on that plastic tab so it won't come out. So now we have the red on that side, makes it a bit easier for us to know which side this should go in. So you can see that this is the red going into V on the end there. So pushing that in nice and snug. So this one here will go to the flight controller on, sorry, the ESC, where it says B for BAT. So I'll get the connector for the ESC, which I think is this larger one. So just comparing these two, it is slightly larger with one extra pin. So that's the one. Before I actually plug those wires into this connector, got to make sure that it is in the right orientation on the ESC, so we know which way it goes in, like that or like that. I am not entirely 100% sure, so I'm going to try it, put it in first, and then we'll take it back out. So underneath there, not sure if you can see that, but I think it actually goes in this way with the tabs on top. So let's give that a try. Yep, so that's right. And I'll just take it back out, just remembering that that's the way that it should go in. So I'll move it this way again. Tabs are pointing up, so it should go in that way. So this red wire needs to go to the bat, the B, which is the second last one over here, and just gotta make sure that that's the right one. So I'm gonna be very careful when I look at this, and I will plug it into that second last one. There you go. So that is the right one. And we'll get the next one, which is ground. I like to have that one in. So the ground actually, I might not need to do because it's going to go into the 5-volt BEC. So I'll go along with the next ones, which the orange one is for CRT. And the current, which is current, sorry. And I'll grab one of these ones here. I might grab this brown one, or maybe I'll use yellow, since yellow is generally for signal. Alright, now I have the yellow one. Just lining this up with the ESC again, always good to double check. And this yellow one should go all the way on the left hand side, which is where C is. So plugging this one in to the leftmost, and once it's in all the way, give it a light tug just to make sure that it's catching on that tab. So you can press down on the tabs as well just to make sure that it's secure. So this one's going to have to be soldered onto the CRT on the flight controller. So I'll get the soldering iron ready. Alright, so what I'll do first is I'll snip off the crimped connector here off the end of the yellow one, and I'll take off a bit of the silicone just to expose a bit of the wire. So just about 1 millimeter is enough. There you go. I'll tin it up and then solder it onto that CRT pad on the flight controller. Alright, I'll just visually inspect that, and it looks good to me. Nice and clean solder joint there. Cool. Alright, so it's going to be a bit awkward in the length, but that should be okay. So it's going to be sitting quite close to the ESC anyway. Alright, so the next ones that I'd like to go through are the motor wires. So they should be these ones here. So on the flight controller, as you can see, it is from left to right 1, 2, 3, 4, and on the ESC from right to left is 1, 2, 3, 4. So they're going to have to cross over. I'll do this one by one, and since we do have the red wire already in, and the one to the left of the red wire is from the VBAT is number 1, so we'll grab number 1 from the flight controller, which is this one, and we'll make sure that it plugs right next to the red wire. So it's going to go into this one here. Make sure that I don't skip any of the holes, and when I push it in, if it comes back out like that, of course it didn't hit the tab, so we need to push it in. Sometimes you have to press down on the tab and pull it back so it's nice and secure. So I'll do the next one, which is number 2 from the flight controller into the next one to number 1 on its left, which should be number 2 on the ESC. Alright, so that's in. Give it a light tug, it's secure. Next one is the third motor wire, so checking that on the flight controller, going into the number 2, or next to number 2, and then the last motor wire, which is this one here. And this one will be going into this last slot here. Well, not last, but the 4th slot for the motor wire. So all the motor wires, VBAT is wired up, and also CRT, which is a current sense from the ESC. So we've still got these 2 wires here, which is the 5 volt for the BSC, and also the ground for the BSC as well. So let's get preparing for the ESC, and I'll show you now. Here is the BSC that I have. It is adjustable, so there is a potentiometer on there, so it takes an input up to 24 volts I think, and it can go down to like 2 or 3 volts, but we'll need it to go down to 5 volts. So I will tune that right now, because when it comes stock I don't know what voltage it is at, so we'll test it out and hook up a battery. So I like to do this, just taking a regular battery, and there we go, we've hooked it up. Okay, so then looking on the underside of this BEC, as I mentioned, one side is the in and one side is the out. So over here is the in for the ground, and then on the bottom here we have the in for the positive. So put this on the side. Got to be careful with these alligator clips when you plug a battery in, because it is live and it will spark violently. So just to be sure, let's plug it in here. That's ground on the input, and then the last one here is the input for positive. So this might actually spark. I've done it before though. Should be okay. So it's just a light clamp there. Okay, so this BEC is now being powered. Got to be careful how I place this, and I can leave it sitting here and use a multimeter just to check the voltage that comes out of it. Actually, I might have to turn it over, because I will have to adjust the potentiometer. Turning everything around, I'll get access to it like this. Alright. So, let's just see what the voltage is coming out of the how can I do this? Just leave it like that. Hope you can see that. So having the BEC there, on the right hand side here we have the negative output, and then on the left hand side is the positive. So at the moment here it is set at 10.4 volts. So I'll need to get a screwdriver, preferably a non-metallic one, but I don't have any of those, so I am going to have to risk it. So right, so I have a small screwdriver here, and it should go in there. I don't know which direction I should turn this, so I'm going to have to do a bit of twisting. So I'll move this a bit further up so you can see. Putting the multimeter on like that, you can see that is 10.9 volts. I'll turn it one way and it should change, so that's clockwise, and it's going down. So I'll just get that to 5 volts. Alright, so there you go. That is now set at 5 volts for the BEC, 5.1. I might get that a bit more just just to make sure that it's right on 5. Alright, should be okay. Alright, there we go. We'll move that multimeter to the side and disconnect power to this BEC. So this BEC is ready to go, and we will try not to touch that potentiometer just in case we change that setting. Right, so now we need to solder this up. We know that this is the end that needs to connect to the output of the BEC. So looking at it from this end, we'll connect it in I think this one is the ground, looking at the diagram again. So this one will go to the out over here, and this one the positive on that side. Okay, so I'll wire that up. I can even turn it around and do the same on this way, so making it the same orientation as the diagram that you see there. Okay, so I'm just going to snip these crimped ends off and tin them up and solder it to the BEC. Alright, so just double checking before we actually solder it on, because I've turned this thing around a bit. So here we have the output side, and this is going to have to go to the output or the input of the flight controller. So ground is the furthest most one on the outside on the flight controller connector, so it's going to have to go to the minus side, which is this side here. So I'll solder that on so I don't forget. There you go. And then the next one is only the last one anyway, so it's going to have to go to the positive side. So let's put that on. Okay. So now that we have that soldered on, we can go to the input side of the BEC, which is going to come from the ESC. So let's have a look at that. So I'm not going to use the pins that come out of here to connect it to here. As you can see on the ESC, there are some pads that we can actually solder to. So I'm going to utilize them, and we'll get them prepared. So I'm going to have to use these wires here. I might not need it to be that long. I'll use these shorter ones. Actually, let's check the orientation of this BEC. So once I wire it up, it's going to have wires hanging out of it, and I'm going to try and place it and somewhere here inside the frame, remembering that there's going to be a camera at the front here as well. So I'm going to try and squeeze it in. We'll see how we go, but I'll need this BEC in there somehow, so I'll cram it in. But firstly, we'll have to solder it up. So let's try and get that in. Actually, you know what? I could probably use the pin out from the connector for the ground, and the VBAT, I'll have to have one of the wires coming out of there, so it's just one less thing to solder. I'll connect this ground here into the ESC side, and I had snipped this earlier anyway, so I can then just solder this onto the ground side of the BEC, which is right on this side, I believe. Yep, it's over here. So just trying to place this somehow. Okay, just double checking that. That is the negative side. Good. Going to ground. Okay, so now we've got that, we need the last one, which is the VBAT going into the BEC, and I will use one of these red ones here. So lifting the tab, pulling it out. There you go. And this one will have to be soldered on both sides, so it's going to be a bit finicky, but let's give it a try. So snipping the end off. Okay, so I'll tin the pad that's on the ESC as well. So it might be a bit hard for you to see, but it will be the second last one on the end there. I just wonder actually, you know what, I'll take that all back. I might wire it up directly to this wire here, so that I can disconnect it when I need to. So I will give that a go. Might be a bit hard. Maybe I'll use my finger. I'll try and pinch it and pull it apart. There you go. These are very soft, so they come out quite easily. So I've exposed a little bit there. I might actually heat shrink it all together as well once I'm done. So let's try and solder that on. I'll tin that wire section. Alright, so now that's soldered on, what I can do is take it off the connector again, and I'll heat shrink this joint here. So let me just grab a bit of heat shrink. Okay, so a section about that long should be okay. Maybe it is a bit too long, a bit shorter would do. Alright, so now that that wire harness has been created, I can plug this one back in. There you go. And this can then go into, which is VBAT, onto the BEC as the input side. So there's only one last one to do. So there you go. A nice joint there. So not the prettiest thing that I've created, but at least it will provide the right power to the flight controller. So let's get this onto the actual frame on top of the ESC. So I'll move these motor wires back like that. Okay. Alright, so the motor wires are going to go like that. The flight controller with the arrow pointing forward, so I'll turn it around. I'll turn it this way just so I can see, but this is the front of the quadricopter where the camera mounts points are, and the arrow on the flight controller pointing forward. So I'm going to mount it in like this. The BEC is of course going to be hanging around here somewhere, and I will put electrical tape around this. I don't have heat shrink the right size for this BEC, but I will put electrical tape around it in a second. Actually, I'll probably do it now. Alright, so that is extremely ugly, but it is what I can do for now, just to protect it. I will try and buy some heat shrink the right size so that I can package this up a bit more neater. I think I might be able to tape this down here inside the frame somehow like this on the bottom, out of the way of the camera. I think that's just about right. So I'll plug this in. So we can get this into the ESC, so making sure that it is the right order of the wires, so the VBAT on the right hand side as the second last one here, and also the current sense, which is yellow. So plugging that in, might have to use pliers just to hold it, get it in there. Okay, so pushing it in and it should fit nice and snug. So there we go. So the flight controller can go on top like this with the BEC down here. So I'll clean up the wires a bit, tuck them in afterwards, but for now I'll leave it in like this, and I'll screw them in with the top stack screws. Alright, so now that we have the BEC connected with the flight controller, it is time to test it out. So we will point the quadcopter this way. We've got the V-Fly short saver again, so we'll plug that in. And then we'll get a battery plugged in as well. Alright, so plugging in the battery to the V-Fly short saver, standby mode, and get everything else out of the way just in case we create a short. Alright, so double checking everything. We've got it all connected from the flight controller with the BEC into the from the ESC, and we're about to power it up. So 3, 2, 1. Alright, so there you go, the tones and the build up tone of the flight controller as well, telling it that it is communicating well with the motors, and the red light flashing there is saying that it is powered up. So there you go, a bit of work involved in this this exercise or this step. I didn't expect that I would have to include a BEC, but some flight controllers are like that, and this flight controller was designated for the other ESC that came with it. But since I'm upgrading it to a 55 amp SkyStars, then it's something that I had to do. So I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed me going through and putting in the ESC. Any questions or comments, please put them down below and I'll try and get to them. So I hope you liked it, and cheers.